a government at odds, a country in crisis. Armenia's prime minister dismisses the head of the army, an order the country's president has refused to carry out. Where will this power play leave Armenia's leadership, and will a nation trying to reconcile losing a war find peace? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Armenia's political turmoil. Well, 3 months after an intense conflict killed nearly 6,000 people and saw large areas of Nagorno-Karabakh formally ceded to Azerbaijan, the Armenian prime minister's hold on power is tenuous. Opposition leader Vazgen Manukyan has told his supporters to prepare for an uprising and be ready to seize power with lightning speed. And he vowed to continue demonstrations without interruption. But with the possible dismissal of the head of the military and the opposition rejecting Prime Minister Pashinyan's proposal for snap elections unless he resigns, Armenia is now a nation on edge. Here's what the past week looked like.
Պաշտոնից ազատել զինված ուժերի գլխավոր շտաբի պետի առաջին տեղակալին։
Well, Armenians have been left in the lurch, waiting to find out if they'll be able to vote in a fresh election to either reconfirm Pashinyan or choose a new leader to take the country out of the current crisis. Here to discuss where Armenia is headed are from Yerevan, Richard Giragosian. He is the director of the Regional Studies Center, an independent Armenian think tank. In Kiev, we have Peter Zalmayev. He is the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. And Matthew Bryza joins us from Istanbul. He is a non-resident fellow with the Atlantic Council and the former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. Thank you all so much for being with us. Richard, let me start with you. The opposition has been calling on supporters to prepare an uprising, and just now they have said they refuse a snap election unless Pashinyan resigns immediately. Does this impatience, I'll use that term, help or hinder stability here?
Well, in many ways, it demonstrates the desperation of a rather unpopular and deeply discredited opposition. What's more important, despite the lingering, long-standing conflict politically, within the past 12 hours, we have a breakthrough, a turning point. The Prime Minister has just reached a consensus with the President and the opposition parties in Parliament for a move to a fresh election.
Explain this, because what we've heard, and just an hour ago actually, was that the opposition confirmed they will not go to an election unless Pashinyan outright resigns. And Pashinyan is standing by, not resigning, instead to wait. He'd rather wait for the outcome of the snap election.
Well, this is true. The opposition coalition, which is not represented in parliament, is largely tied or linked to the former corrupt government. They continue to demand the resignation of the prime minister as a prerequisite to the early election. Significantly, however, there's a deepening division within the opposition, given the reality that the two parties from the opposition in parliament have just forged a tactical agreement where an early election is no longer conditional on Pashinyan's resignation or ouster. But nevertheless, this does reflect a deepening divide and division within a polarized society. And to be quite honest, even an early election is not the answer to deeper deficiencies and political shortcomings.
Okay, I want to get to that broader issue in just a second, but I first have to ask you about the still outstanding issue, Richard. I mean, as far as the head of the army is concerned, after the military demanded Pashinyan resign, he fired the military chief, only to have that blocked by the president, who says it's unconstitutional because the army, ironically, must be kept out of politics. Will the army chief survive here, and how much does his role matter to the power dynamics in the country?
Again, interestingly, we have recent developments that have overtaken that conflict. The chief of staff of the armed forces was leading a conspiracy, if you will, of over 36 senior officers, openly defying civilian oversight and opposing the government. The president of Armenia, although a largely symbolic post, was seeking to bridge or mediate this conflict, and initially refused to accept the prime minister's decree of dismissing the chief of staff. However, in the past days, following a meeting yesterday between the prime minister and the president, there was a consensus agreement. The president is no longer going to oppose the decree, but he will not approve it either, meaning that within 24 hours, according to the Constitution, the decree will legally take effect, meaning that the chief of staff will be ousted. In many ways, he's a sacrificial lamb.
Oh, unfortunately, it looks like... sorry, Richard, you'd said he looks like a sacrificial lamb. Continue from there. We lost your connection briefly.
A sacrificial lamb in terms of a deeper challenge for Pashinyan, what to do with the other 36 senior officers. But his removal, which is now certain, will be a deterrent for any future army move against the government.
Okay, let me ask Matthew Bryza. I mean, Richard is getting us some even fresher lines than what we're hearing from our sources up until, just half an hour ago. Are you encouraged at all by what you're hearing out of Yerevan, or does it seem that this could get sorted out, or are you worried about just more tension rising?
Oh, I'm really encouraged. I'm usually encouraged by just about anything Richard says. We've been friends for years when I was covering Armenia as well as Azerbaijan. I have felt for a long time that the only way this whole situation can unwind in a non-destructive way is to have some sort of compromise brokered whereby Armenia gets on a path to a new election. This is a real breakthrough, as Richard said. Pashinyan has been saying for the past several days that he wants to control or be part of the process for the transition to a new election. So he seems to have won on that point. President Sarkisyan has been also saying the last few days he wants to get all the players together at the table, the opposition, the government, and broker a way forward. So again, it sounds like, based on what Richard said, that way forward is now coming into view. Also, I'd note that in the last couple of days, Pashinyan had suggested that in October, there might be a referendum on either a new constitution or modifications of the current constitution that would move Armenia away from the current parliamentary system, after having been a presidential system, of course, since independence, and move it to a sort of a semi-presidential, semi-parliamentary system. Who knows what that really means in concrete terms? But to me, that was a sign that Pashinyan is giving ground as well. And so, as Richard described, here's the compromise. One last point. I think it's really significant that A, that the resignation of the chief of defense was accepted, and B, that the military never got involved in a kinetic sense, in a physical sense. There's no sign that I can pick up that the military wants to rule. It doesn't want to form a junta. It doesn't want a coup, but it also doesn't want Pashinyan. And I think Moscow is putting the brakes on any military involvement by the Armenian military, because the last thing Moscow wants is to see Pashinyan, who it doesn't like, but see him ousted in a coup, because Pashinyan is the one who signed the November 9 and 10 ceasefire statement that Putin brokered. And I think Putin now knows.
Looks like we've lost our connection with Matthew there. I can see him. We'll get back to you in a second, Matthew. I want Peter to pick up on your point about what role potentially, Peter, you think Russia is actually playing behind the scenes. It seems the Kremlin was never completely comfortable with Pashinyan in power, but there are also a number of Armenians who think Russia moved, surreptitiously against Armenia by even the detail of failing to provide the proper military equipment it had promised in order to fight the war in Nagorno-Karabakh. So what is the Kremlin doing right now behind the scenes, Armenia?
Well, you said it, you put it very well and very correctly. And I'm sitting in Kiev, Ukraine now, where, as you know, we've had two so-called color revolutions, and Russia, Putin are very wary about the triumph of any sort of pro-democratic takeovers in its backyard. And Pashinyan, 2 years ago, came on the wave of such a resentment against the ruling elite, even though he never rode any sort of anti-Russian wave of discontent. All political players in Armenia are very much pro-Russia. They know that their security depends on Russia. I think Russia is happy with pretty much any outcome. If the opposition were to win in a peaceful sort of way, in some sort of arrangement, it would be fine with it. If Pashinyan kind of kept his power, albeit weakened, Russia is fine with it too. In a way, it will be even happier with Pashinyan weakened but staying in power, because it will have more control over Pashinyan. What Russia was clearly unhappy with is the disparaging comments Pashinyan made about the Iskander missiles. Mind you, they were given to Armenia, obviously, before Pashinyan in 2016, and Armenia is the only post-Soviet country that got the weapons. And truth be told, this is a very sophisticated weaponry, and it was, frankly, unfair for Pashinyan to disparage Russia, to try to deflect the blame from his apparently poor leadership in times of war. So I think Russia is happy with any outcome. It will definitely want to keep the terms of the agreement that was signed between the parties, between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia. But you know what? It will continue considering Armenia and using Armenia as a potential wild card in case Russia comes to a belligerent kind of situation with Turkey. And Russia has always in Turkey had very, very uneven relationship. Armenia will be that card Russia can play in case it wants to escalate the situation with Azerbaijan or encourage revanchist forces in Armenia as a way to get back at Turkey.
Okay. Richard, I want to pick up on a point with you and about where the military really does stand now. Please explain what the military actually thinks, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, what they actually think Pashinyan got so wrong. What was he to blame for in losing the war with Azerbaijan?
Well, to be honest, a lot of the criticism is somewhat justified not by what Pashinyan did, but what he didn't do. Armenia was never fully engaged in the war for Nagorno-Karabakh, and there was a degree of restraint and hesitation. This was primarily a defeat of the armed forces in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a separate standalone force. Nevertheless, what's interesting is the timing of the officers' move against Pashinyan more than the motivation. As Peter noted, Pashinyan made a very risky, rather impulsive criticism of Russian military weapons. This actually drove the officers to see an opportunity for Russian support that never came. Because Pashinyan in 2018 is very different than the post-war Pashinyan. Pashinyan in many ways is Putin's trophy, representing ever more firmly an Armenia well within the Russian orbit. So I actually dismiss and discount the military as a factor going forward, especially as the unprecedented nature of the military intervention into politics was not only without precedent, but with no experience. And that showed.
Fair enough. Matthew, let me ask you how much you think Armenians actually see Pashinyan maybe as the best of some bad options. You know, it was so good to just actually finally see a leader in Armenia. He was a journalist and an editor, not really connected to politics. And now there is a fear now that Armenia could fall back into the ways of governments past, you know, beholden to oligarchs and in what many describe as all-out state capture. Do you think Armenians are fully aware of what the alternatives are, even if they're agitated with what Pashinyan did or didn't do? Do they understand that the other options might not be what is necessarily best for the country?
It seems to me they understand very well. I mean, there's not a whole lot of polling data coming out of Armenia these days, but on February 19th there was a Gallup poll, and it asked Armenians it was a telephone poll, which some people say maybe aren't that reliable, but in any case, it asked the respondents to rate their trust in leaders, current, former, opposition, and on a scale of 1 to 5. And so Pashinyan came out the highest at 2.8. And then President Armen Sarkisyan was at 2.3. And then the opposition leader, Manukyan, was much lower, 1 point something. Same with the former heads of state, the first 3 heads of state of Armenia. So if judging by that poll, Pashinyan is a front runner. The poll also showed that 33% of Armenians supported him, while 66% didn't. But those 66% who oppose Pashinyan, their votes would be broken up among the 17 parties that constitute the opposition coalition. So I think that what that shows is Armenians are really frustrated. But I do think they realize there probably isn't a better option right now, because they know better than anybody how corrupt that former regime was. And that's, I mean, I had to deal with it all the time, negotiating on Nagorno-Karabakh or the Turkey-Armenia protocols. And so it was such a breath of fresh air for those who followed the South Caucasus when Pashinyan came to power, in a pro-democracy mood, and in a pro-Western way. As Richard has said, it's a perfect phrasing. Now Pashinyan is the trophy of Russia. And Putin needs Pashinyan to maintain the November 9 and 10 ceasefire agreement, which Putin brokered. If Pashinyan is out, I fear that agreement will be torn up by whomever comes in. And I think that the Armenian voters, by and large, are perfectly comfortable if Pashinyan is seen as a powerful human link to Russia. Russia's seen as right. Armenia's protector historically.
Richard, I can see you agree with most of what Matthew said. I just wonder, are we being fully objective? I understand why you believe in Pashinyan as the best of potentially, not ideal options right now in Armenia. But are we being objective? Is this really the best case scenario for Armenia going forward?
Well, unfortunately, yes. In other words, it's not support for Pashinyan, but it's the danger of the alternative, the opposition from the former corrupt government attempting to regain power by abusing and misusing political discourse. However, even with a free and fair election, that does not do enough to resolve deeper deficiencies, the lack of accountability, institutional oversight. I'm optimistic going forward because of institutional resiliency. It's no longer about individual Democrats. The real key is institutional democracy.
That's good to hear. Let me get Peter's perspective again, because you are most familiar, obviously, with your home country of Ukraine. You've seen how the struggle to become a true democracy has been a struggle. Especially what you were talking about with the kind of intervention and the behind-the-scenes moves of a country as powerful as Russia. What do you worry about for Armenia going forward? What would you like to kind of advise them maybe from the Ukrainian experience? Or are you fully optimistic that this can be sorted out and dealt with peacefully?
I mean, your skepticism that you voiced in your question is fully justified. As someone who's been divide my time between New York and Ukraine, but I'm originally from Ukraine, have been living in Kiev for the past 4 years. And ever since the second Maidan of 2014, we've seen a sort of revanchist kind of wave here in Kiev of fifth columnists, I would say, people who are beholden to Russia, who have pro-Russia sympathies, or who are outright agents of Russian influence, try to shape the narrative here in Ukraine through media, through very expensive TV channels with money that are being channeled from Russia. 3 of these channels have recently been shut down here in Ukraine on order of President Zelensky, a very controversial and bold move. So what I'm driving at is that in Armenia, in Ukraine, and elsewhere in the post-Soviet state, the main way that Russia tries to influence these countries, to try to keep them from moving closer to Western style of democratic governance, or from joining Western alliances such as NATO and maybe the European Union, is by shaping the narrative through media, by co-opting media. Same in Armenia. Now that, as our colleagues have referred to Mr. Pashinyan as a trophy of Moscow, Moscow will be making an effort to shape the debate in its favor. And so will be very important to try to withstand this kind of pressure from Moscow, to make sure that the media are independent, or at least not dependent on Moscow. And that is a very, very difficult thing to do.
Richard, how does that resonate with you, hearing that Ukrainian experience as an Armenian?
It doesn't. It's the one time I disagree with Peter. In other words, Russia has such structural leverage over any Armenian government, owning sectors of the economy, military security dependence, that the danger for Armenia is not Russian soft power. They don't even bother. But the real danger is Armenia becoming little more than a Russian garrison state. Having said that, we do have one important lesson that Peter raises from Ukraine: the danger of regress, the risk of retreat, where reform and democracy is imperiled, as it is under assault in Armenia today.
Richard, I'm going to ask you this because, so much of Armenia's hope for the future was in part in encouraging a very successful and influential diaspora. I mean, Armenia is one of those rare countries where the diaspora is multiple times bigger than the actual population of the country and multiple times more influential. They want that diaspora back. They want people to bring their skills, bring their talents. First of all, tell me to what extent that has happened since that initial drive was started. And do you fear that this kind of instability right now is going to put that at risk?
Well, as someone who used to be from the diaspora, I've moved to Armenia 16 years ago. My perspective has changed. A state-centric driven strategy or vision is quite different from a diasporan perspective. However, I am pleasantly impressed. The post-war posture of the global diaspora has changed. It's graduated to a more mature understanding and recognition that the necessity of democracy, the importance of economic development are as crucial as the genocide issue or other, like Nagorno-Karabakh, other pressing issues. This is a new maturity, but it's a two-way street. The Armenian government has actually failed to meet expectations, how to harness this potential, how to translate potential into reality. The diaspora could be in danger of always being a potential, but never a reality.
Okay, Matthew, let me get your thoughts.
Yeah, to hear those words is really hopeful for me, that the diaspora is evolving in this more sort of pragmatic direction. I've had a lot of dealings with the Armenian diaspora in the United States, positive and negative. And I think it's, the entire country of Armenia needs that sort of sobriety to take hold. And it will be, great for Armenia and for everybody in the region if the quest for a greater Armenia, which means recouping lands that were once part of an Armenian megastate in the Middle Ages, if those aspirations could be dropped. Because if they are, and if if today's Armenia decides that its main goal is to reintegrate into the regional economy and beyond through the reopening of borders, especially the Armenia-Turkey border, I think Armenia's future can be pretty bright and its economic situation can improve substantially. And that could lead to those diasporans like Richard, some more, returning to their ancestral homeland. And that would be great for Armenia.
Just quickly, Matthew, how far off could that, potential reintegration in the region be?
Well, the way is getting cleared in terms of potential infrastructure projects. Lots of discussions have been going on in a trilateral working group among Russia and Armenia and Azerbaijan. Here in Istanbul, in my circles of business people, there are some big projects that are being thought of, like a petrochemicals industrial zone that could be on the territories of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey simultaneously. But I think the big obstacle is inside Armenia, as evidenced by the current political crisis. I mean, this war was the most traumatic event in Armenia probably since 1915, right? And so that psychological dust has got to settle before I think there'll be a spirit of wanting, in Armenia, wanting to reintegrate with Armenia and Turkey, Azerbaijan and Turkey.
Matthew, I will let you have the last word. We are unfortunately completely out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of our panelists so much for joining us. Thanks for watching to our viewers as well. See you next time.